great lesson starts in the planning before the lesson, and a good lesson continues from the very first minute. Let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back. It's another episode from Craig and Dave at the Chalkface. I'm Craig and this is Dave. Say hi, Dave.
Hi, Craig. You're still not pointing in the right direction.
Well, I think I was on mine. I don't know. Anyway, enough of that. So, we are going to get into high expectations. Now, if you've followed the channel at all, you'll know we've already previously done a video on high expectations, and we made it really clear in that video that we meant high expectations doesn't necessarily mean hard work. And we talked about what that looked like. And, so what do we mean about high expectations? Well, we discussed in that video how there were many forms of high expectations and what that looks like in the classroom. So today, we're going to be focusing on what we're calling high expectations from the first minute. And I have no doubt that if you are been a teacher for any length of time, you would have come across this from your head of department or SLT. I've been in all sorts of schools and meet and greet them at the door, get them in, get them on, starter activities. And we're going to unpack all of that today and basically look at what is high expectations from the very first minute mean, because I don't think you can be in a school without coming across this at some point, Dave, can you, from SLT or someone else? And it's important. It's important. So, unpack a bit about that, Dave. What do we mean from the very first minute? What are we, in reality, in practice, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so for me, the very first minute means that moment, the bell's gone, and the students are due to arrive. They're going to arrive any moment. And it's sort of, what are you doing in that time just before they arrive? And then instantly when they arrive. Because lessons frequently for new teachers unravel very, very quickly if you don't get the start right. But even for experienced teachers, this isn't about trying to teach you how to teach. This is going to be about exemplifying how our resources enable you to have that really positive start to a lesson and actually raise attainment.
Yeah. So, okay, let's tackle one of the classics then. Okay. Because we can't talk about high expectations from the first minute without touching on the meet and greet, which you kind of alluded to there. And our school had a really, big emphasis on this. And it's, I know we've occasionally said it in the past, sometimes you get initiatives from SLT and you think, oh, here we go. But I couldn't agree with this one more. You have to remember the moment that bell goes, you are setting the tone for your lesson. And when those students pour in, you've got, let's say 30 kids possibly at Key Stage 3, and they are coming from a whole different set of experiences and a whole different set of situations, and every lesson will be different. Maybe that bell has gone just after break and it's been chucking it down with rain and they're all excited and all a bit wet, or they've just come from, dare I say it, bless you PE, they've come from PE. So the bell goes and then PE turn around and say, right, off you go and get changed. Like, oh, brilliant. So I'm going to have some students coming in late, or they're just coming from the other side of the school. Whatever happens, the start of that lesson will be different every time. And for all these different students, for all these factors you can't control. So controlling that calm entrance to your classroom, that meet and greet for me, is where your first example of high expectations sits. So for me, it doesn't matter where you've come from or what's happened before. You know that when you arrive at Mr. Sargent's classroom, he is going to be there outside the door. And this was something our head teacher insisted on. And I'm not being arrogant here, I did that long before the head teacher insisted that I want to walk around and I want to see meet and greet. If you're not outside that door, we're going to be having a chat later that day. So I always stood at the door, and the students knew if they turned up, I could see them coming down the corridor, Dave, starting to tuck their shirts in because they don't want the wind when I get there. It was as simple as that, as opposed to then unpicking it during the lesson. And we can get into a lot more of this, but I'm curious about your experiences and opinions on the power of that kind of doorway greeting, that form of high expectations, the meet and greet.
Yeah, well, every school has very different routines. So some schools say that the students need to line up outside,
Yeah.
and when everybody's there, then the sort of teacher brings them in a line, and that might be important for some rooms. Like, for example, if you're in a laboratory or in design technology or places where there are risks, and often that risk is then applied to computing rooms as well, where teachers may not want the students coming in immediately. And other schools have a completely different approach where they say there's no lining up outside or any of that. The students need to come in, as soon as they arrive. That you don't kind of stall them at the beginning. You get on with the lesson immediately, regardless of who's arrived.
Mm. Get
And
in,
so
get on.
it's
Mm.
really important that you are able to sort of meet and greet. And as Craig says, you can stand outside the classroom and kind of catch them on the way down the corridor and watch their behavior change as they approach you. And what you often find is that where teachers stand depends on their experience. So the least experienced teachers tend to stand much closer to the door. And the more experienced teachers tend to stand away from the door because they're still answering their emails or whatever they're doing at their desk at the time, or maybe they haven't even arrived. I've worked with plenty of teachers in the past consistently arrive late, and I have to say, poor sort of assistant heads and deputy heads, they're always dealing with another crisis. So inevitably, they're always the ones that are latest to their lessons. But they carry the authority and they carry the routines and the experience and the expectation of what students do in their absence. So it's not such a big deal. But yeah, it's important that you create a bottleneck so that students have to kind of file past you. And it's an opportunity for you to build those relationships, because it's so important in getting high expectations that you build positive relationships with students. So it's that opportunity just to touch base with them. Sometimes it's going to be in a negative way, saying, tuck your shirt in and things like that. But you want to try and focus on the positives and say, hi, James, hi, Anna, and really try and inject a little bit of positivity at the beginning of the lesson, and make sure that they know that you're in control. And quite often what I say to new teachers that are struggling with behavior is it really starts at the door. And if
Yeah.
you let students just pile in a rowdy way, then you're off to a bad start. And there have been plenty of occasions where I've said to the class, this is not acceptable, go back outside, line
Oh,
up,
yeah.
because we're not in the right frame of mind to be learning, and learning is what we're here for. But in many ways, that was my fault that I enabled that situation to happen in the beginning. If I was at the door and I was letting them in one by one, meeting and greeting, and then pausing people coming into the room, if I wasn't happy
Yeah.
with the behavior from the students that were already in the room, then I would have managed that situation an awful lot better. So high expectation is about the very first minute of that lesson.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I go further to that. I stand on the door on the way out as well. I mean, did I do that consistently throughout my career? No. Sometimes I get to the end of a double lesson, the bell would go, and I've not looked at my watch. It happens to us all, and it's like, oh, well, okay, right, off you go, everyone, and everyone pours out the classroom, and I've forgotten to set homework and all sorts. But 99% of the time, I'd say I'd be on that door at the exit as well. And then what happens is you find virtually all your students, even the ones who maybe you think you've not got on so well with that lesson, you'll get a little Tarsa, cheers, cheers. And I think that's really important. So I would say I was standing at the door, and I would stand out in the corridor. So I'm not right by the door. I'd stand a little bit away, and they'd see me coming, and they knew that I'd always be there. And I would stand there for the moment the bell went for a good 3 to 4 minutes, sometimes 5. Now, in a 50-minute lesson, that's not an inconsiderable chunk of your lesson. So what that means is the first 3 to 5 minutes, I've got students coming into my classroom, and now they're in without me there. I'm sure I can see them, but I'm staying out in the corridor. So now this moves our conversation on to, well, what are all those ones doing that are in the classroom and are on time? Because you've got 5, 10, then you've got 15, 20 in there. And then after 5 minutes, you're like, well, I'll pick up the latecomers. I'll now go in. So now there has to be a high expectation, a consistent high expectation as to what those are doing that have entered the classroom. And you touched on this, get them in, get them on. So schools often call this, get in, get on, the do now activity, engaging them on entry. So I wouldn't be afraid of standing out of that corridor for the first 3 to 4 minutes, because I hopefully would know that when I walk back in, my class are getting on with what it is they need to do. But that's about setting a high expectation. And because again, this is different. Some schools will have policies of what that do now thing is. But for you, and especially let's say if you're using our resources, if you don't have a school policy, what can that do now, get in, get on activity look like, Dave?
Yeah, so the important thing is that you have the instruction on the board, and that you train the students that when they come into the room, they know what they need to do because they're used to looking at what it says on the board that they need to do. And those instructions on the board need to be really simple, really sharp, and to the point. And hopefully you build routine over time. So at some point, they probably don't even need to look at the board because they know exactly what it is that they have to do. So I would say really there are sort of 3 things that you want to have a look at. And the activity really either needs to be reflecting on previous learning, or it needs to be preparing for the learning that is going to happen. So whatever the activity is, it really should be reflecting one of those 2 positions, but essentially sort of 3 things that you could be doing. You could have an activity on the board that is very simple, that prepares the students for the lesson because it gets them to think about something related to that lesson. If this activity isn't just a quick sort of question answer, but is a little bit more thoughtful, that's always better. Students are going to go off task quite quickly, or maybe not even engage and get on task, if that activity isn't straightforward for them to engage with. But something that prepares them for lessons. So, for example, with the Craig and Dave resources, if you have got any of our GCSE packages, then every single lesson comes with what we call a starter activity. And you can project that on the board, and it gets students thinking about what they're going to be learning in the lesson. It may well be that you have got workbook type approach, and you can establish a routine of students coming in and getting on with whatever the first activity is in their workbook. Maybe they've got a copy of whatever that starter activity is on the board. But it's really important that what you want them to do is on the board, so there's no ambiguity. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if you are an A-level school and you're using the A-level Craig and Dave resources, then you'll know that we have hundreds, probably thousands, of what we call micro activities. So although we don't actually signpost any one particular activity as a starter like we do at GCSE, you can use any of those micro activities that are suitable for the lesson as a starter. And you can simply have on the board, start with activity 01, architecture of the PC, whatever it happens to be, right? So you've shared the micro activities in advance with the students, and you get them into this routine of, look, when you come in, whatever's on the board is the micro activity you're starting with. And of course, this activity needs to be something that they can actually do without any tuition, which is another reason why we advocate the flipped classroom approach. But you can do this completely without flipped classroom. You just have to be mindful of what the students can do and what they already know. So that's 2 things. The third thing.
Oh, you're going to take my one away by constantly talking. Are you going to say about smart revise?
Yeah, exactly. So the third thing, which is probably the most powerful thing, is to use Smart Revise. So if you're a school that's got our Smart Revise platform, then we recommend that you get the students in the routine of coming in, logging on, getting into Smart Revise, and starting quiz. It doesn't need any more instruction on the board than open Smart Revise and start quiz. That's the only thing that they need to do. And so you might be thinking, well, okay, if I've got Smart Revise, then what am I supposed to do with the starter activities at GCSE in your resources? And what do I do with some of those micro activities then at A level if I'm not using them as starters? Well, you can use them how you like. If you want to use them as an interim activity within the lesson, then you can. If you want to use them as reflective pieces towards the end of a lesson, then you can, or you can just completely ignore them. It doesn't really matter. You've just got more resources at your disposal. But Craig,
Yeah.
right
No, I
bang for us.
go on.
Why quiz in Smartadvise is such a good starting activity?
Well, you've turned around and said that, your starter activity, yes, it needs to be throwaway and you can stop it at any time, but it needs to either prepare them for the lesson or recap previous learning. That is why Smart Revise Quiz is so good. It is doing that recap of knowledge. Not only that, it is recapping each student on the knowledge that they need recapping on the most. So as the teacher, you've gone and set hopefully the topic filters. So every lesson becomes a sort of recap on the previous learning. This is all the stuff we've talked about before, getting in your space learning, interleaving, forgetting curve. You're going over previous content. So you've got a real worthwhile purpose for the start of that lesson. As I said, the best bit for it is you don't have to do anything, and it's completely personalized to those students. And we've seen this work so well. I mean, I've seen schools that we've been into where they literally have big sort of A3 or even A2 posters up on the wall that say, every lesson, come in, log on, 5 minutes of Smart Revise quiz. And that allows the teacher to do all that stuff said about meet and greet, or giving them an immediate do now, engage on entry activity, which is worthwhile, recapping previous learning, recalling knowledge, beating the forgetting curve. And if you do it consistently, and I want to get on to consistency later, we've talked about it a little bit. If you do it consistently, it becomes expected and the instructions on the board aren't even looked at. So all of that is your high expectations. And that's why, Smart Revise Quiz is so perfect. It's never going to end either, is it, Dave? They're not going to run out of Smart Revise Quiz questions because it's a never ending playlist curated for that student based on what they know and what they don't know and they're learning at that point in time. So, yeah.
That's the other problem I often see with starting activities, is that the teacher hasn't really thought about, well, what do the students do when they finish it? And so the whole point of having this initial activity is so that the students are engaged the moment they get into the lesson, but then they create another bit of downtime because the activity doesn't last long enough. And so I would always overplan this phase. It's better to have more work for the students to do than the time that's available. And the beauty of quiz, as Craig said, is that it's never ending. They will not run out of questions because they're on a permanent loop, essentially, that's reprioritizing which question the students get. So that gives you control as a teacher because you can just say, carry on with quiz, and then you can judge when to stop that activity. Now, I typically say use an odd number. So maybe 7 minutes. But it doesn't have to be 7 minutes. It can be when you think it's time to move on as a teacher. So I wouldn't be tied to the time, but I also wouldn't let the activity just drift into the main lesson for too long either. But an odd number of minutes is an interesting one because if you say to the students, oh, right, you've got 5 minutes to do this, what you're doing is you're subconsciously telling the students that the activity doesn't really matter. Because if it's only 5 minutes, who cares, right? And then if you say to the students, right, we've got 10 minutes on this, yes, it gives it more importance, but it also subconsciously gives the students the impression that you haven't really thought about it because why should this activity take exactly 10 minutes? And that's why I kind of mix things up a little bit. And I say to the students, right, you've got 7 minutes for this, you've got 11 minutes for this. And I don't really mean they've got 7 or 11 minutes at all, because I'm not looking at my watch particularly. I'm just judging the mood of the room. And when I think it's time to move on because everybody's settled, they're into the right frame of mind for learning, then I can start the lesson for real.
Perfect. Just a little quick one here. I was thinking about Smart Revise and saying do quiz. If you're a teacher that makes regular use of tasks, and brilliant, mock exams, end of topic test, baseline assessment, all sorts of things, I'd urge you not to go to the effort for yourselves, waste the time creating tasks for your starters. Because I have seen it in some school. Right, I want starters. I'll create a task. I'll make it available. You get in. It's a waste of your time. And one of the things we want to do is obviously save you time. Quiz is totally personalized. You have to do nothing, and it will carry on until you want to pick up and carry on the lesson. They're not in danger of running out because they've got to the end of your task questions, like you just said there, Dave. So yeah, don't fall into the trap of thinking you have to set a little small task for your starter. Literally just say, come in and do quiz. Pop on a poster. Before you know it, it will be an expectation. Be consistent. That's your high expectation. So yeah, I just wanted to throw in that warning. Yeah, because we've seen some teachers do that, create hundreds of tasks at the start of all their lessons, but please don't do that. Go on. Sorry.
So no, you're absolutely right. You don't need to use tasks for that. Craig's absolutely right. So okay, Craig, we're off to a great start. The students are all busy. Yep. We've got the right tone in our lesson, and now we want to do something else. Whether that's a second activity, whether it's a class discussion or demonstration, a bit of teaching from the front, whatever it happens to be. I've got a transition to now negotiate. And this is where, again, for inexperienced teachers, things can start to fall apart because they don't have a smooth transition. What does a smooth transition mean for you?
Oh, that's difficult. There's hundreds of things. I think the smooth transition, if you've got your starting meeting at the door, greeting, getting them in, getting them on, and you establish this routine, then your transition almost becomes seamless. So for me, at this point, we've all got to take the register. You've come in after your 3 to 4 minutes. They're all getting on with the regular thing. The instructions are on the board. So you've already got a quiet class, maybe not silent. Okay, you've got a quiet class. And then it's very easy for me to say, right, quick register, please. I run through that register. And then what I would do is immediately turn off and say, right, monitors off, hands off the keyboard, facing my way, and then I would do whatever it was I need to do next, whether that's a little bit, say, of teaching from the front. But have that prepared. That's the bit. You don't need that starter prepared, if you're using Smart Quiz, or you've prepared something which there's plenty of stuff for them to do. But the point is, if you've created that good atmosphere at the start, that consistency, that routine, your transition should be smooth. You just have to know where you're going next. Don't be that teacher's like, oh, right, okay, they're all getting on with a quiz. I'm now going to fiddle about my monitor and click through my shared files and folders and find the PowerPoint I want. Know where you're going. Make sure the first thing you do is quick and easy. So I would say have something prepared that doesn't mean you have to faff about with tons of resources. If you do, get those ready before the lesson, or you start them off on something where they can get on. Like, first thing you're going to do, dive onto OneDrive, whatever it is, and we're going to get going with a discussion in pairs on this activity. Leave your more complicated stuff, like you've got a big group activity or a role play or stuff that uses additional props. Leave that for later in the lesson when you've got some momentum going. If you want to start off with something more complicated, have it prepared before the lesson. If that's not practical because you're going between lessons, then leave it till later. If you've got break before, just put that coffee down 1 minute earlier and get it ready. So that's the point where you can suddenly fall apart, isn't it? Because you've got this wonderful, smooth, get in, get on. And then you realize, oh God, I've got to grab this box. I've got to grab these. I've got to do that. And it takes seconds for you to lose what you've established in that classroom. You give them more than a couple of seconds and they're now chatting and you're like, oh, I've lost all that momentum I started with. So it is really important. But I would say if you thought about it, the transition should be next to seamless because you've already got them where you need them to be. I'm sure you've got a take, Dave. What's your thoughts on what I've said?
No, I completely agree. And that's why I started this episode with high expectations before the students even enter the room, before you even kind of greet them at the door. Make sure that you've gone round, collected a little bit of litter, especially if it's not your classroom and you've come in, following someone else's class. Then it can be a nightmare sometimes. But setting the tone at the beginning with the furniture and everything else that's around is really important. So put the chairs
Yeah.
in, make sure the computers are turned on, make sure that the students can log on. You're not going to have technical difficulties. Mop up any loose pens and bits of paper that are around and things like that. So things are
Yeah.
nice and clean and tidy and ready to go. And the reason that's important is because you don't want students finding distractions. Okay.
Yes.
There's always going to be, a sweet that somebody has left behind from a previous lesson or something, and you don't want that suddenly, being unwrapped, chucked in the bin from 20 yards away, or whatever else might actually be happening to slightly derail the situation. So, as Craig said, it's really important that you get the students concentrating and maintain it. And something that you said there, Craig, was you would say to them things like, right, come away from the computer, hands and
Mm,
mice off the keyboard. You might have software that enables you to lock their screens and do things
sure.
like that. But the important thing is that you get those students where you want them by making sure that they don't have a distraction. So,
Yeah.
one of the biggest mistakes I see, again, new teachers make is that they start to talk, they start to address the class before all members of the class are fully
Oh,
focused on the teacher. And
yeah.
so it's really, really important that you get that transition into the next phase where all the students are doing exactly what you want them to do with no
Yeah.
distraction.
And I would just add to that, we do have an extra bigger distraction in computer science that a lot of teachers don't have, and that is that monitor, that keyboard, and that mouse in front of them. I'm not saying this is easy for any teacher, but we have an extra distraction. So I would never talk to a single student while they were looking at their computer. And this is not at the start, this is at any point in the lesson. When I'm talking, right, everyone facing my way. And if I saw two or three, so I'm just going to finish off this sentence and click on this and click on that, I would wait. And they would know I would wait. You've got to be persistent with it. It might feel like you're waiting too long, but doing it and setting that expectation and being consistent means it will be quicker next time, and it is worth it. Because if they're staring at that monitor and finishing their sentence, they are not listening to the start of what you're saying. And I'm assuming what you're saying is important and you want them to hear it. So again, it's about that consistency. With younger classes, I would actually it would be a normal thing, be monitor off, a little button on the monitor. If you're able to do that, I say monitors off and face my way. That was, oh my God, I feel like I'm back in the classroom. That was the phrase, the number of times I said that over the years. Monitors off and face my way. And it's so easy because you look around the room and there's 3 monitors. And I would just say 2 to go, 1, thank you, Peter. Everyone my way, and that's it. And then you're right, school software is great. You can just press the button and you'll hear the moan in the classroom. Oh, you've locked every monitor and every keyboard. I was in the middle of, well, you can get back to it in a minute. Everyone facing my way, but so important. I want to end, Dave, on something. We've talked a lot about consistency, and I want to touch on something myself that I feel very strongly about. But I want you to help me unpack this phrase towards the end. So, high expectations aren't about being strict; they're about being consistent. Now, we've used that word a lot this time, but maybe just unpack that little phrase for me. High expectations aren't about being strict; they're about being consistent.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a consistent message that we've been giving throughout the couple of episodes we've done on high expectations already, that, high expectations isn't about the students doing hard work. And high
Hmm.
expectations isn't about you ruling with an iron rod. You shouldn't need to. If you build positive relationships with students, and if you encourage routines so that students know what to expect, teenagers need routine. When there isn't
Yeah,
routine, when they don't know where the line is, when they don't know what to expect, when they want to try and push the boundaries, that's when things fall apart. So the way that you combat that is by being really consistent in what you're looking for from them and the way that you approach your lessons. And so it doesn't mean every lesson has to be formulaic. You can mix it up, but it doesn't mean that you have to be strict, and it doesn't mean the students always have to be doing hard work. You just
yeah.
need to be consistent in what you're expecting.
Yeah. And the one thing I wanted to add, and to go further than that, is for me, consistency was also, it's so important that you set and apply these high expectations fairly at all times. And I'm sure we'll end up doing a whole lesson on high expectations and behavior and what does that look like, because you can't avoid it. But for me, this is a bit of a link into that episode. And I was not immune to this. You will have, dare I say it, favorite students, the good students who do all the homework and they do what they should. And it's yes, sir, no, sir, and they're so helpful. And when they slip up occasionally, you won't apply the same high expectations or consistency as you do to the, dare I say it in quotes, naughty student who you're expecting to misbehave. What you then do is set an unfair playing field. Poor is definitely not the right word, but the students who are not behaving or having the expectations you want, you will pick on more easily, or for lesser offences, be shorter to praise them. And that now gives your high expectations no currency. It is so important that you are consistent. I would, again, SLT, our school, were very good at saying, for the students who are typically, more badly behaved, make sure you catch them being good. And I completely believe that. Praise is so important. But that doesn't mean I'm now not praising the good students when they do something. I would see it before. Oh, why are these students always being given reward trips and always being given these points? I'm always good. Now you get resentment from the students who feel they're doing the effort. And it all comes down to simply not being consistent. I would praise good students and your typical more poorly behaved students every time they do something well. If a really good student slipped up, I would make sure to say, no, that's not acceptable. Don't just pick on, the students who are being badly behaved, because I think that is so important. That's so important. Making sure you are consistent with your high expectations. I say, otherwise they have no currency. So I'm sure we'll probably unpack that a bit more if we do an episode on sort of, behavior management and what high expectation looks like there. But I think that was really, really important for me. And we've said it before, you've got to be consistent. Right. Any last minute thoughts or comments from you, Dave, before we wrap up? You always need to have one more gem.
No gems. So just a final mention that, this is part of a series of episodes that we're doing on high expectations, and we will do another one about what happens next. So we focused initially on episode 1 on homework before the lesson. Today we focused on what happens at the beginning of the lesson. And in the next episode, we'll talk about the main lesson, if you like, and what high expectations might look like in the main lesson. But just to finally touch on one thing that you said there, Craig, which was not letting your good students get away with things as well. One thing that I've noticed over the years, particularly when I've had really good classes, and this can happen at A-level, when you've got a very small, tight-knit A-level class and they're all good academic students, you let them get away with more than you would let other classes get away with. And to a certain extent, that's acceptable because it's about treating them as adults and establishing the rapport and relationship. And maybe you don't need to have exactly the same expectations of A-level students as GCSE students, but you need to be careful that your line doesn't slip to a point where at some point, and I've been guilty of this, you step back from an A-level lesson and you think, they're not actually doing what I want them to do. They're not actually doing the work. They're not actually learning.
Yeah, we all just had a good laugh, and that's absolutely right. We've all had a good laugh, and they managed to get me distracting talking about the latest Marvel film for 30 minutes. And you're right. That is some of the beauty of teaching the more adult learners. You build that rapport, and I'm not saying that's not valuable and important, but I've been guilty as well, and I'm sure every sixth form teacher will be able to admit it. There has been occasion, and this is where the expectations come in, where that line has been crossed, or an A-level student has maybe said a sarcastic comment they thought was funny in the moment and wasn't, because we have this rapport. I'm always able to go, do you want to try that again? And then I usually go, oh, yeah. Sorry, sir. Yeah, I went too far there. Yes. Yeah, and being able to bring that back and then realizing, okay, no, I enjoy the fact I enjoy having banter with my teacher. This is a fun lesson I look forward to, but I am here to learn. They are the teacher. And you're right, and that is part and parcel of it, isn't it? That's part and parcel of the fun of teaching. Right, well, we'll wrap it up there for now. So thank you for watching another video. If you have any comments, please leave them in the video or drop us a line at admin@craiganddave.co.uk. And don't forget, you can check out everything we do, including Smart Revise, Time to Code, and our teaching resources at craigandDave.org. we'll see you soon. Bye bye.